The study of manufacturing costs is the title of this learning module. Now, we begin with a few cost concepts. When we talk about the cost of something, we have to talk about cost in relation to that something. That something is called the cost object. It can be anything. It could be the cost of paving a kilometer of the highway. Hotel management may want to determine the cost of offering a hotel room for the night. A manufacturer company needs to know the cost of producing this product. Well, the hotel room, and the kilometer of paving and the production of a product are all cost objects. Now looking at the cost object. Now we need to distinguish between a direct cost and an indirect cost to the cost object. A direct cost is a cost that can be traced to the cost object and measured exactly. An indirect cost can also be traced to the cost object, but we cannot measure it exactly. Now let us look at a manufacturing company. All manufacturing costs that went into the production of a product can be categorized as follows. 1. Direct materials. Then we have direct labor costs. All other costs are indirect costs to produce the product, and they are called manufacturing overhead. So now let's assume that we are producing a desk, a normal desk that you would find in any university. When we look at that desk, we can look at the wood that went into the manufacturing of the desk. Now it's obvious it went into the manufacturing of the desk, and I could measure exactly how much wood was used to manufacture that desk. Well, the wood would be considered direct material. I can trace wood to the cost object, which is the desk, and I can measure exactly how much was used up in making that desk. So that is a direct material. Now, also, in producing the manufacturing of that desk, I use some glue to glue the laminate to the wood. Now I know glue was used in the manufacture of the desk, but I do not know how much glue I used, so therefore, that glue would be considered to be indirect and therefore part of manufacturing overhead. The second category of manufacturing costs is labor. We have two types of labor, direct labor and indirect labor. Now, direct labor is the work of the factory employees that can be physically traced to manufacturing that desk, and I can measure exactly the time and what we pay that employees. So I know his labor is direct to the production of that desk. There's a supervisor who is also supervising 4 or 5 people who are manufacturing desks. Now I know the supervisor is necessary to produce this desk, but I don't know how much of his or her time was used for each desk. My cost object is a manufacturer of one desk, so that supervision labor would be indirect labor. There's also people who drive forklifts on the plant floor, moving material from one to the other. That, too, would be indirect labor. Those costs are necessary to produce the desk. But I don't know exactly how much was consumed by my cost object, which is the production of one desk. All indirect costs associated with manufacturing this product are called manufacturing overhead. To conclude, the 3 cost categories to measure the cost to produce a product are 1. Direct material. 2. Direct labor. 3. Manufacturing overhead. In a manufacturing company, we now must distinguish between the costs that went into producing a product from all the other costs that are incurred in a manufacturing company. Therefore, we must distinguish between what we call product costs and period costs. Now a product cost is a cost that was incurred to produce my desk, and the product costs are in 3 categories. Direct material, direct labor and manufacturing overhead. These costs are integral part of producing the product. They are actually the cost of producing my finished goods inventory. So you see, they are not an expense in a normal usage of the word expense. They were consumed to produce inventory, and they do not become an expense until they are sold and therefore charged to the cost of goods sold. Then they become an expense. Now a period costs are all those costs that were charged to the accounting period that had nothing to do with the production of my desk. These costs would be selling and administration costs, marketing and advertising costs, costs of the president and vice president and their secretaries, the payroll accountant and so on. These costs had nothing to do with the production of the product. They did not go into the production of my product, so they are referred to as period costs. Now, to look at the financial statements of a manufacturer. The income statement is basically the same as a merchandise company. A merchandise company purchases the inventory they sell. You know exactly the cost of the goods you purchase. Well, for a manufacturer, it's the cost of goods manufactured. So now you have to do a summary of what was the cost of goods manufactured. How do I determine that? Well, I know at the beginning of the year, I had some work on the shop floor that was not completed before the beginning of this year. That is the beginning working process inventory. And to that, I add the total manufacturing cost incurred throughout the year. That is a total direct materials, the total labor and the total overhead. The sum of the beginning work in process and all manufacturing costs gives me the total work in process for the year. Then I subtract what is still left on the shop floor at the end of the year, and that provides me with the cost of goods manufactured. A cost of goods manufacturing statement looks like this. It's for the year ended December 31st. It begins with the ending working process last year, which becomes the beginning working process this year, and that's 18,400 now. To that, we add direct materials, direct labor and manufacturing overhead. In this case, the direct materials we have to determine by looking at the beginning. Raw material inventory 16,700. Add to it. The purchases we made of raw material during the year gives me the total raw materials available for use, and I subtract what I have not used by the end of the year 22,008. Therefore, I conclude that the direct material used would be 146,400. Then the direct labor 175,006 and the manufacturing overhead 54,008. Now you notice there in the middle column. The outside column is just for summary. Now, if I want to move in and look at what was that? 54,800 manufacturing overhead? Well, there I have a list. Indirect labor 14,300 factory repairs, 12,600 utilities and they're in a column. Besides, so you see, moving from left to right, we get more and more succinct information. So the middle column gives you the three cost elements. Direct material, direct labor and overhead. When we totaled that, we have the total manufacturing costs that was incurred on the shop floor this year. 376,800. We added to what we began with direct material, direct labor and overhead of 18,400 which is work in process beginning of the year, and that gives us the total cost of the working process 395,200. From that, we subtract the ending working process, the jobs that we have not finished by the end of the year 25,002. And that provides me with the cost of goods manufactured. Now on the balance sheet we have instead of just one merchandise inventory. As for merchandiser, we have three inventories. Raw material inventory, which is your direct material and the indirect materials that is your wood and the glue. The working process inventory is the work that's being done on the shop floor. Currently, it's not finished, but because we've added labor and overhead to the raw material, it's no longer raw material. It's work in process, and finally, the completed goods. Okay, the finished goods. So we have three inventories on the balance sheet, and for the income statement, you now have the cost of goods manufactured. Lastly, about manufacturing. This is an overview of a manufacturing plant. I have taken the roof off. You will notice on the right as you enter the company you see displays of the products the plant produces. This area is the selling and administration area. All period costs. When you enter the factory you are on the plant floor where there is a lot of work in process. In the lower left corner is where the raw material is received and stored. Then the factory floor activities of production and assembly all work in process. Then when finished stored in finished goods inventory. Awaiting to be sold and delivered. This completes our overview of a manufacturer.